They thought weakness lived in silence, that a man who kept his head down and spoke only when spoken to must be afraid of the world around him, and that belief followed Daniel Cross like a shadow he never asked for. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, Daniel woke in a small rented apartment with peeling paint and thin walls, careful not to wake his 6-year-old daughter Lily sleeping in the next room, her small chest rising and falling in the quiet rhythm that reminded him why he kept going. He packed her lunch, tied her shoelaces, and smiled even when his body screamed from old injuries no one knew about, injuries buried beneath civilian clothes, and a calm expression that fooled everyone, including the woman who would soon regret underestimating him. Daniel worked as a maintenance supervisor at a large corporate complex downtown, a job that paid just enough to survive but never enough to dream, and every day he endured the same cold looks, whispered insults, and deliberate humiliations from the company's senior operations manager, Karen Whitmore. Karen was sharp-tongued, ambitious, and cruel in ways that never left bruises but always left scars, and she had decided early on that Daniel was an easy target. She mocked his quiet nature during meetings, blamed him publicly for problems she caused privately, and made sure everyone knew she saw him as disposable, a weak single dad clinging to a job he didn't deserve. Daniel never defended himself, never raised his voice, never reacted, and that only made Karen push harder, mistaking restraint for fear, mistaking discipline for submission. What Karen didn't know was that Daniel's silence wasn't emptiness, it was control. Every insult slid past a mind trained to survive chaos, every humiliation barely stirred a man who had once led soldiers through gunfire and darkness, who had learned long ago that reacting emotionally could get people killed. Daniel had served 12 years in the military, 6 of them in classified special operations units that never appeared on resumes or public records, missions that erased villages from maps and memories from his sleep. He had commanded respect without demanding it, had carried wounded men through smoke and blood, had learned to endure pain without flinching and loss without breaking. But when Lily's mother died in a sudden accident, Daniel walked away from the uniform, choosing fatherhood over medals, silence over recognition, and anonymity over power. He wanted a normal life, a safe life, one where his daughter would never hear explosions or learn how to recognize the sound of incoming fire. So he took a job beneath his capabilities, kept his past locked away, and accepted being underestimated, because peace, he believed, was worth the cost. Karen, however, saw his past as a blank space she could write over with cruelty. When a costly equipment failure shut down part of the building, she blamed Daniel without evidence, shouting at him in front of executives, calling him incompetent, threatening termination with a smile that never reached her eyes. Daniel accepted the blame quietly, knowing the truth would surface eventually, but Karen didn't stop there. She reassigned him to night shifts without notice, cut his overtime, and began a paper trail designed to destroy his reputation and his livelihood. When Lily got sick and Daniel asked for one afternoon off, Karen laughed and told him to manage his personal problems better, a sentence that echoed in his mind long after he left her office. That night, as Daniel sat beside Lily's bed listening to her cough, something inside him shifted, not anger, not rage, but resolve. The kind of resolve that once prepared him to walk into places others never returned from. The turning point came during a company-wide emergency drill that Karen insisted on overseeing herself, eager to impress upper management. She ignored Daniel's safety recommendations, overruled his experience, and rushed the procedure to look efficient. When a real electrical fire broke out, unplanned, uncontrolled, and deadly, panic spread through the building. Employees froze, alarms blared, and Karen stood paralyzed, screaming orders that contradicted each other. Daniel moved instantly. His body remembered what his mouth did not need to say. He took command, evacuated floors, shut down power, carried an injured employee through smoke, and prevented a catastrophe that would have claimed lives. Security footage later showed him moving with calm precision while others panicked. The executives watched in stunned silence. Karen watched too, her face pale, her authority evaporating in real time. That should have been the end of it, but humiliation breeds desperation. Karen, feeling exposed and threatened, decided to dig into Daniel's background, convinced she'd find something to use against him. What she uncovered instead was a sealed military record, commendations marked classified, and a past so decorated it frightened her. Rather than backing down, she made the fatal mistake of trying to weaponize it. She leaked partial information, twisted facts, and accused Daniel of hiding a violent past, implying he was unstable and dangerous. HR launched an investigation. Daniel was suspended. Lily asked why her father was home during the day, and Daniel hugged her tighter than usual, knowing the storm had only just begun, but storms were something Daniel understood, and Karen had no idea what she had just awakened. Karen Whitmore believed information was power, and for most of her career, it had been. She had climbed by exposing others, by twisting half-truths into weapons and letting silence finish the damage. So when Daniel Cross was suspended pending investigation, she felt victorious, certain that his quiet obedience had finally broken. What she didn't understand was that Daniel had never been fighting her battle at all. While HR combed through his limited employment history, a different process had begun quietly, efficiently, and far beyond Karen's reach. The moment Daniel was placed on leave, a former commanding officer, now a senior security consultant for the same corporation, recognized his name. That recognition triggered calls, encrypted emails, and records that hadn't been opened in years. Daniel didn't ask for help. He never had to. Loyalty, he had learned in war, didn't require requests. It only required truth. The HR hearing was scheduled as a formality, or so Karen believed. She walked into the conference room confident, armed with printed emails, manipulated reports, and carefully worded accusations about concealed aggression and potential workplace risk. She spoke loudly, clearly, and with the smug certainty of someone who thought she already knew the ending. Daniel sat across from her, calm as ever, his hands folded, his eyes steady. When asked to explain his military past, he did not embellish or defend himself emotionally. He stated facts. Service dates. Units omitted due to classification. Medical discharge following family loss. He apologized, not for who he was, but for not disclosing information that was never required. The room was quiet, uncomfortable, and Karen mistook that silence for doubt. Then the door opened. The board members hadn't expected additional attendees. Neither had Karen. A man in a tailored suit entered first, followed by two others, one wearing a discreet lapel pin few civilians recognized, and another carrying a sealed folder marked with federal clearance codes. Introductions followed, short and devastating. The first man was the company's external risk advisor. The second was a retired colonel from Special Operations. The third was legal counsel representing Daniel Cross. Karen's throat tightened as the colonel spoke, not with anger, but with authority sharpened by decades of command. He explained Daniel's role in operations that saved civilian lives, neutralized international threats, and earned commendations that could not be publicly listed. He described discipline under pressure, restraint under provocation, and leadership under fire. Then he paused and looked directly at Karen. "If this man were dangerous," he said calmly, "you would not be sitting here today." What followed unraveled Karen's career thread by thread. Security footage was reviewed, footage showing Daniel preventing a disaster Karen had caused. Emails were examined, emails revealing her manipulation, her retaliatory behavior, her deliberate targeting of a single parent. Witnesses spoke, emboldened now that the power dynamic had shifted. Employees admitted they had been afraid to contradict her. HR's tone changed. Executives exchanged looks. Karen tried to interrupt, to redirect, to accuse, but the room no longer belonged to her. It belonged to truth. By the end of the meeting, Daniel's suspension was lifted. He was formally commended for his actions during the fire. Karen Whitmore was placed on immediate administrative leave pending termination. Her leaked accusations were deemed defamatory. Legal consequences followed swiftly. The very tactics she used to destroy others turned inward, collapsing her influence overnight. The woman who once thrived on humiliation left the building without applause, without allies, without the power she believed defined her. Daniel returned to work quietly, declining promotions he didn't need, accepting only what would give him more time with Lily. But something had changed. People saw him differently, not as a weak man, not as a target, but as a reminder that strength does not announce itself. Karen lost her job, her reputation, and eventually the industry that once rewarded her cruelty. Daniel gained something far greater: respect, peace, and the knowledge that his silence had protected what mattered most. That night, Daniel tucked Lily into bed, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. Outside, the world continued its noise and ambition, but inside that small apartment, there was calm. He had never needed revenge. Justice had arrived on its own, precise, restrained, and final. Belle, if this ending moved you, imagine the next story waiting. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional stories about underestimated heroes, quiet strength, and unforgettable justice.